Hey, so glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. You know, we're in that gap between Christmas and New Year's, Jim, where you're not exactly sure what day it is, but eventually it's New Year's Eve today. That's still a couple days away, and we've got a lot of year-end specials still to go this week, so we hope you join us for all of that. Today, we're going to be looking at best idea, worst idea, and boldest tactic. Tomorrow, we're going to be taking a critical look at the media. New Year's Eve, we'll be doing our big awards of Person of the Year, Turncoat of the Year, Loser of the Year. And then on January 2nd, we'll have our fearless predictions for 2026. So glad you're with us for all of that, hopefully, and hopefully you've enjoyed the specials up to this point. But with all of that as prelude, Jim, what's the best idea of 2026?
Well, first of all, before I get to that, Greg, I want to welcome all of our listeners to that time period we are technically working, but nothing's getting done. So I would characterize myself as something of a skeptic about AI, artificial intelligence. And I don't mean the entire concept. I just mean the current enormous excitement about it and the way it's being used all over through the U.S. economy. I lived through the dot-com bubble, right? I worked at a dot-com. I don't know if AI is a comparable bubble, but I looked some of these numbers up. At some point, there's going to be a correction. In 2025 alone, there were 236 AI startups, and that's as of November. Probably a little higher before the end of the year. 2024, the U.S. saw the formation of 1,073 newly funded AI company startups. So then you add that up, that's about 1,300 companies. 5 years from now, a bunch of those companies are not going to be around, right? Now, if you've been looking at the markets, you probably have noticed that a group of trillion-dollar brands, yes, that's what the TR, the Magnificent Seven, Alphabet, which owns Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, which is more commonly thought of as being Facebook, Microsoft, Nvidia, now selling some of their best chips to China, and Tesla have been at the forefront of all of these gains in the economy, in part because of their corporate spending and intense interest in artificial intelligence. If you often you'll hear the S&P 500 used as a number, right? And then, if you look at that, it's gone up, like about 100 and some percent since 2019. With those big seven, it's grown more than 1,057%. So there really is a S&P 500, and then there's an S&P 493. Now people are like, why is Jim saying this is the best idea? Well, AI has all kinds of downstream economic effects, notably trillions of dollars that are going to be spent on construction of data centers, on increasing demand for electricity, 1.4 trillion alone just being spent on new electricity production. This is a colossal investment. All betting that at some point AI is going to become this enormously useful tool in all kinds of ways and not something that will hallucinate. Seymour Butts was the brother-in-law of Woodrow Wilson, who was pardoned. That was cited by, I believe, was it The View woman? The point is that every once in a while you will find some journalists, liberals, who will cite AI as a source, and they'll put out something out there on social media, and it's absolute nonsense. So the AI investment boom is my nomination for the best idea of the year, because not only without it would we not be enjoying what has turned out to be a pretty darn good year in the economy, we might even be in recession, right? So I'll talk a bit more about this in my worst idea selection, but this is fueling all the booms going on this year, all of the gains, everything that's going on there. So because it's been a very nice year for my 401k, the AI investment boom is the best idea of 2025.
Well, yes. And like you said, we'll see how long it lasts. Hopefully everyone's 401k continues to do well. But this is a rapidly emerging technology. And like we've said not that long ago, we don't know what it's going to look like in a couple of months, much less a few years. And so the potential for tremendous good is out there. The potential for tremendous harm is out there, depending who's using it and working with it and developing it. And so there's a lot to be interested in, and there's a lot to be worried about. So, but as long as people are doing it, then it's going to be making people money.
Yeah. People forget that in the movies, lots of people made money in Cyberdyne. So until Skynet arrives, we're going to be enjoying this boom, riding it all the way up, and then the nukes will fall. But until then, it's going to be a really good ride. So.
Exactly. All right. For my best idea, Jim, you know how much I hate to pay taxes. You can tell it grinds my gears whenever we talk about it.
Let's point out for all the IRS, Greg still pays his taxes.
Yes,
I do pay them. Yes. He just hates to do it.
Yeah. I hate to do it. And there's one tax that I hate more than all others, even though I don't like any of them, and that's property taxes. There's a lot of reasons why I hate property taxes. And so we need to do something about property taxes. But first, let's again, explain why property taxes stink so much. And it's also going to be uttered by the guy who has the best idea of the year.
And these property taxes, it's like you buy a home, you buy land, maybe you buy the home outright, but maybe you pay off a mortgage over 30 years. And then, okay, you've paid off the mortgage, you bought the land, you've been taxed many times. It's like, is it your property or not? Just for being on your property, you got to write a check to the government every year. So you're basically paying rent to the government to live on your own property.
Yeah, on your own property, which stinks. And so he is now trying to get an initiative on the ballot, a statewide referendum next year, which, as we know in Florida, I think you need at least 60% for it to pass, to abolish property taxes. Now, this has been tried in other states, and it's usually failed. Not because people, can articulate why it's good to have property taxes. He just perfectly explained why it's a total scam. I bought the property, I own it, and whether I've paid off my mortgage already or not, especially if I have, there's no reason I should be cutting checks to the government to live on my own land. But the argument is always, well, what are we going to replace it with? How are we going to fund the schools? You'll find a way to fund the schools, whether it's a consumption tax. Florida doesn't have an income tax, but they could have a small one. I wouldn't encourage that, but there are ways to do it. And so the argument that we can't get rid of this horrific tax, which is totally unfair. It's regressive against the poor because you could buy your house for a pretty low sum of money, relatively speaking, in your neighborhood. But then if you hang on to it and property values soar, you're on the hook for massive property taxes that make it really, really hard for you to pay. So the poorer you are, the worse it is for you as long as housing costs are going up. And so the idea of abolishing it is fantastic. Yes, there will probably have to be a different type of tax to replace it on some level, maybe more than one, depending on how you structure it. Sales tax could also be another area, of course. But ultimately, getting rid of property taxes would be a great thing.
Greg, that is an excellent selection. And I think, look, Ron DeSantis, one of our favorite governors here on the podcast, raising a really excellent question of what do we want to tax as a country and as a state and locality? What are we aiming to? What sort of thing do we think should be taxed? Because the old saying is, if you tax something, you'll get less of it. If you reduce taxes on something, you'll get more of it. But for most people, their house, they're just living in it, and it's not generating income. If you sell it, it'll generate income. Of course, then you got to find another place to live. If you rent it out, it might generate income, but that's fairly a minority position amongst most homeowners. So the question is why? If I'm living here, how am I supposed to get the money to sell this? And it was a show on ABC where people would build a house for some family that had been through some disaster or had a handicap.
Makeover Home Edition.
Yes, and it was the most feel-good. Aren't those really great people? Look at them hammering. Now, you in the audience, you weren't actually doing anyone to help, but you felt good watching it, right? And then an enormous number of these families realized they got the house and were handed it to them free, but they could not afford the property taxes, right? Now, here's the thing. What were they supposed to do? They're not million. Yes, it's a very valuable home they just got, and often it was built with a elevator for a kid in a wheelchair or something like that. But they didn't have the financial resources to keep paying what the localities believed that they were owed. If you own a stock, ideally it's paying a dividend. So maybe you're getting some cash there to pay any taxes on that. But even then, you're only paying those taxes when you sell it. What do you want to do? And the idea that property, for that matter, here in Virginia, the car tax. My car is not generating money by itself. I use it to get around, to do all the stuff I need to do. But otherwise, you have these things and you'd think you own them, but the government has decided, well, we're going to charge you something every year for the privilege of owning them. And it's unsurprising this is unpopular. Greg, that is an excellent selection.
Hopefully it passes in Florida next year. We will find out. But up next, bad ideas. And after that, boldest tactics. All right, Jim, we've gone through the best ideas. What about the worst ideas of 2025?
Greg, every single year, a lot more competition for this category than the preceding one. I alluded to this in my answer a moment ago. The worst idea of 2025 was the tariffs that have been instituted by President Trump. And I would point out, instituted by the executive branch, not signed off by the branch. If they were, I might have less of a gripe with them. And let's point out, I'm perfectly fine with the concept of economic decoupling from China. I think China is not just a geopolitical and economic competitor. I think it's not good for us to have dependency on them for anything in our defense industrial base, anything in terms of our healthcare system needs, including prescription medications. I think it makes sense for us to be as minimally economic dependent on China as possible, and I am okay with instituting tariffs on goods from China as part of that. Everybody else, though, no, it doesn't make any sense, and it really is infuriating when we're trying to build a relationship with a whole bunch of these countries or maintain a relationship with all these countries, and then we're instituting tariffs on them. I think the tariffs are probably the biggest dead weight holding down the economy right now, and it's not just, and I should point out, it's not just the institution of the tariffs themselves. It's the fact that Trump changes them at seemingly the drop of a hat, including in one case with Canada based on an ad he saw during the World Series that irritated him. Everybody kind of knows it all depends on what mood Trump is in, and that he can suddenly double them or shrink them, or they can change very rapidly. Well, businesses kind of need to know, what is it going to cost me if I need to import a component of this thing that I build here in America? Everybody kind of has to have, look, you're never going to have perfect predictability in the business environment. But this is one where you could ideally have a much clearer sense of what it's going to be. I'm not even going to get into the imposing of tariffs on islands full of penguins and all that stuff earlier in the year that made the administration look ridiculous. But just also my final note, I've heard this on my trip over in India, and I've also heard this from representatives of the Japanese government here in the U.S. They're actually very interested in getting a deal, and they're not, the concept of renegotiating the tariffs trade policy between the U.S. and these countries, they're not opposed to that. They're willing to talk. What they have found infuriating for the entirety of the year is what the U.S. actually wants the tariffs to be, or what the trade policies to be. It keeps changing, and it can change depending on which member of the Trump administration they speak to. There was one anecdote of a conversation between Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, Jameson Greer, our U.S. Trade Representative, and I believe Lutnick, and there was a third, and they're meeting with Japanese representatives, and one of the U.S. representatives says something that one of the other ones didn't agree with, and they start arguing with each other, and they start debating with each other, and they say to the Japanese, we're going to need to put you on hold because we need to work this out. And if you're the Japanese, say like, hey, we'd love to get to a deal. You guys need to know what you want there first, which is just utterly infuriating. I think when on Liberation Day, when they were announced, I believe it was Kevin Hassett was on one channel saying that what's best about the tariffs is that these are negotiating, they're temporary, and they're just designed to get tariffs as low as possible. While I believe it was Trump's right was insisting, no, these are permanent. They are not changing. There's no negotiations over this. So it's kind of choose your own adventure. Whichever philosophy you like, you can change channels on. It's a disastrous policy. It's a giant dead weight for the Republicans heading into the midterms. As of this recording, I'm hoping the Supreme Court strikes it down. I've heard some people say, yeah, it's very likely to happen. I've heard some people saying, no, the Supreme Court's going to punt on this. Just utterly infuriating, and the entire presidency could look very different if they did not have these tariffs in place.
It appeared at first like the markets were going to be in full revolt, and then they put a pause on the tariffs and said we're going to rework all these trade deals, and they have reworked some, but I don't think they've reworked nearly as many as they claimed that they could, and so things are still in flux, and it's hard. We got these revenues, and we're supposedly getting $2,000 checks, but ultimately it is leading to higher prices for folks, and that's frustrating certainly as well. Mine is not directly related to tariffs, but you could definitely say it's tariff adjacent. I'm going to take you back to, might have even before Trump was sworn in. And obviously you got plenty of horrible Democratic ideas that could have gotten this award, but you kind of expect that from them. This is what I consider kind of an own goal. And this is when Trump had Justin Trudeau down to Mar-a-Lago, and then tweeted out about how Governor Justin Trudeau is here from the 51st state of Canada. I mean, the left in Canada was politically floating in the water face down. It was dead after just all the destruction from the Justin Trudeau administration and all the infringements on liberties and the high cost of living and the climate taxes and all this stuff. And people were just ready to revolt. And then Trump trolls Canada, trolls the conservatives in Canada, teases about tariffs, applies the tariffs, and the left, which had to call an election this year because the parliamentary elections had to be done on 5 years or whatever it is or sooner, and they see that Trump is antagonizing Canada, like, well, this is going to be our best chance to have an election. So what should have been a romp for the right in Canada, with Pierre Poilievre coming in as prime minister and being a far better partner to the United States than Mark Carney and the left now in Canada, The people of Canada basically reject the Conservatives up there because they were frustrated with how Canada was being treated. It was kind of an immature response, in my opinion, just because you should be punishing the people that put your lives into misery. But nonetheless, that's what happened. That was the most recent thing in their minds. And what should have been an easy layup of a win and a great partner in Canada. You know, we've had good partnerships with Brian Mulroney in the past, and Reagan-Bush era, and George W. Bush and Stephen Taylor briefly there. It could have been something that was very valuable. Now we're stuck with lefties because Trump just couldn't hang on for a few months and let the left politically implode, and then he'd have somebody good to work with.
Greg, when I was thinking about the best ideas or the worst ideas of 2025, I had not expected your selection to be so Canada-centric. Maybe it reflects Michigan's proximity to Canada. And the only state so cold you travel south into Canada.
True.
But as I look at it, it is, and it's reflective of a basic problem with Trump from the beginning. He's got an ambitious agenda. There are chunks of that agenda I very strongly agree with, and I think have a great hunger from coast to coast in this country. There are other parts of the agenda I'm not such a big fan of. But if you're going to try to do these big ambitious things, you need to have as many allies as possible, and you need to have try to minimize the number. Some enemies are just going to happen. Some enemies are just going to happen because people don't like what you want to do. But you don't want to make unnecessary enemies. You don't want to antagonize people who you could work with. And it would have been really nice to have a like-minded leader in Canada. I'm going to guess that a Canadian Conservative is always probably going to be like more center right than the typical American Conservative. But that's fine. That's your odds of getting what you want with a like-minded leader increase dramatically. Trump couldn't do it. And in the end, I'm sure it made him feel good to, mock Justin Trudeau as a governor and to say, we're going to annex you and all that kind of stuff. We didn't get anything for it. There was no upside. There was no lasting effect other than to keep a very liberal party in control of that country, which has been in control for a very long time. Yeah. And a whole bunch of people who started out, who I happen to know, who are, let's say center-left Canadians, have drifted right over years out of frustration with Trudeau and frustration with the policies up there, who were ready to vote right. And then, of course, it basically turns a referendum to patriotism. Are you going to stay with the guy who's standing up against Trump, or are you going to stay with the guy who's saying you're just a colony of the United States? And we should not be the least bit surprised that Canadians reacted that way. So another excellent selection, Greg.
Yeah, you just need those relationships to flourish instead of being in conflict all the time. It's not about being Canada first or anything. It's just about, you go back to the Cold War. Obviously, Reagan and Thatcher were the major players on the good guys' side, but Mulroney was there, and having more people on the stage who agree with you, and he was very well-spoken. He could articulate the position in many different ways, and Canada's part of the G7 or G8 or whatever it is now, and, they're a major trading partner, biggest trading partner, I think. So being on good terms with them, pretty important. Even if you don't like some of the things that are going on up there, but we turned the NHL All-Star Game into basically the second coming of the Miracle on Ice. I'm like, it doesn't need to be this intense, people. Yeah. it's just kind of an own goal if we want to keep the hockey metaphor going there.
Some of the worst tensions, Greg, since the terrible SCTV Saturday Night Live battles of the late 70s and early 80s. It was
yes, very tense.
Moranis' charge and all of them.
Very tense times. All right. Well, we still got Boldest Tactics. That's next. All right, Jim. Plenty of bold tactics. Anytime you've got Donald Trump as president, bold is going to be out there quite a bit. But what's number one?
All right. So for anybody who's a listener who thinks, Jim is always grousing about Trump, he never gives Trump the benefit of the doubt, hit record. You're going to enjoy this next session. Cherish it. Doesn't happen that often. The boldest tactic of 2025 was Trump authorizing the military strike against the Iranian nuclear program. And Greg, you and I have been doing this podcast for a long time, but even before then, I'm thinking back to like the Bill Clinton years. We knew the Iranian regime, the mullahs, wanted to obtain nuclear weapons. We knew how phenomenally destabilizing to the entire Middle East that was going to be. And it was one of those things where we heard about it from Clinton, we heard about it from George W. Bush, we heard about it from Barack Obama, we heard about it from Trump in the first term, and then we heard it from Biden. And yet, not just from intelligence sources, although they're very useful, even public reporting, statements from the regime itself, they kept inching closer. And there was talk about breakout capability. And the question was, they have all the separate parts. They're trying to enrich the uranium, all these different things. So the question was, if, the Iranian mullahs, the supreme leader, Khatami, or somebody said, let's go, build a bomb. How much time would it take for them to then take all those separate parts, put it together, and would they have enough for one bomb? Would they have enough for 12 bombs? Now, if you're Israel, it's a really tiny country. It's about the size of New Jersey, right? Many presidents have talked about going on helicopter trips with Bibi Netanyahu and being able to basically see from at a sufficient altitude, you can see from one border to the next. It's not big. It would not take a lot of nuclear weapons to effectively wipe out the state of Israel. And then the question is, who else does Iran want? And let's point out, Iran not only begins its parliamentary meetings with death to America, death to the great Satan, death to the little Satan. And if I were the British, I'd be a little insulted. They're back in the day, they were a fully sized Satan, but that's fine. All right, And so the question, what we're going to do about it? And there are various sanctions, and sometimes they're effective. Sometimes you'd have operations like Stuxnet that could have been anyone, Greg. We don't know how that virus got into those centrifuges, but we know it ruined them and all that stuff. And there was kind of this, behind the scenes, tit for tat, cat and mouse game between the Iranians trying to build nukes and eventually enough deep, underground bunkers, they were able to start assembling all the pieces together. And Donald Trump, with a lot of criticism from the Tucker Carlsons of the world, who believed that we were going to get into World War III. This was going to, the U.S. was going to lose the war in the sharp-eyed analysis of Tucker Carlson. Well, it turns out, no, it did not start World War III. And in fact, the initial assessments, look, it takes time to do bomb assessments. But the latest ones that I had read, that we set the program back 2 years. And people might say, only 2 years. Well, okay, here's the thing. Once you've got the knowledge, it's very tough to do that. Now, a whole bunch of Iranian nuclear scientists in the course of this year particularly, but also in previous years, kept having random strange accidents. The one who fell down an elevator shaft onto a pile of bullets. That was weird. I just understand, it's the same OSHA, Occupational Safety Hazard Administration inspections that they're doing in Russia, where critics of Putin keep falling out of high buildings, out of high windows all the time. But either way, this was the most dramatic act any U.S. president had taken against the Iranian regime and its nuclear ambitions in my lifetime. And it was with genuine risk. There's no two getting about it. This was an operation that was planned to minimize the risk of U.S. casualties. It was clear. It was simple. It was direct. It was not hitting ground forces. It was not involved. This was basically, this is what we object to. And the interesting thing was that Trump kept emphasizing how much he wanted to negotiate and how much he was willing to negotiate. But he also was adamant, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. We've been hearing that since the days of the Weekly Standard. But now actually somebody did something about it, and the Iranian nuclear program has been set back dramatically. And it's very tough, and people are like, but they can do it here. Look, it's very tough to do that if your centrifuges are destroyed, which apparently is what happened in one of the facilities. So it is a significant setback. It is probably one of the greatest accomplishments of the administration this year. And kudos, President Trump. Now, you can stop hitting record because I'll be critical quickly again. But nonetheless, one of the best accomplishments of the administration in the past year.
No question about it. And it was decisively done. It was expertly carried out. Those B-2 bombers all flying all the way from Missouri, getting the job done and back. Excellence again, of course, by our military. And yeah, there was a lot of debate going on about whether this would escalate things big time in the Middle East. It did not. We got the perfunctory one missile strike against the U.S. base in the Middle East there, and then that was pretty much it because Iran didn't want any of that. Yeah, exactly. We're gonna crack your asphalt in response to that. So,
look at those roof repairs you're gonna have to deal with, America. Let that be a lesson to you.
Right.
I think I spent more on roof repairs this year.
That's true. You probably did. All right, on to my choice for boldest tactic, and as always, we stipulate that boldest doesn't necessarily mean successful. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's just a really, really good idea, and that is Doge. It wasn't executed to the best it probably could have been. I don't like the idea. I'm not sure why it had to be limited to a certain window of time, but it did, and it seemed to some to be kind of random, which departments they were starting with, and so forth. And so, yes, it could have been executed better. But the idea of going through every government department, every government agency, and figuring out where waste could be trimmed, where programs could be cut or reduced. And yeah, I'm sorry that some people might lose their jobs, and in some cases they did. But if a program is redundant or unnecessary or stupid, then it shouldn't exist. And unfortunately, those jobs don't need to be there. And so the idea of going through our completely bloated government, which is I don't even know what we're up to now, 7 or 8 trillion, I guess, with an annual budget, which, a decade or so ago, was much, much lower. And so the idea of coming through that was very smart. It was a great idea. I think it helped Trump win in 2024, but it ran into the same resistance and roadblocks that it always does, regardless of whether the operation is done in as organized a fashion as it could be, because everyone freaks out. This wasn't dealing with entitlements. This was dealing with much smaller numbers, significant numbers to the rest of us, but you want to cut wherever you can, and everybody freaks out. The libs freak out, and as soon as they freak out, the media freaks out, and nobody wants their program cut. And it's just kind of proof. It's kind of like negotiating, with some of these people who just never want to make a deal, like we see in the Middle East sometimes. There are just people who refuse to let it happen. And ultimately, as we've said over and over, a lot of those people keep getting their jobs. Voters put them there, even though they're not serious about getting spending under control. And spending is out of control. We've got $2 trillion deficits every year. We've got a national debt well north of $38 trillion now. The interest on that debt's well over $1 trillion. And with interest rates, even though they're going down where they are, that's a lot of money that we have to spend every year on that. It's more than what we're spending on defense. But nobody ever wants to get serious about it. Trump, through Elon Musk and Doge, tried to get serious about it, and everybody freaked out about it, which shows why you can never have nice things.
Greg, that is another excellent selection. If you had said to me, author of The Weed Agency, way back in 2014, in the year 2025, Donald Trump will be president. What? And he's going to take the richest man in the world, who's a celebrity, and he's going to appoint him into this temporary special position, running a government agency whose job is going to be to look through the entire budget line by line and see what they could eliminate. I would have said that is the greatest thing in the whole wide world. And like for about a 2-3 month window, cutting government spending is going to be cool. It's been a very uncool cause for most of us for a very long time. So on the one hand, again, it is not a complete failure. I'm looking at the website that as of this recording, they've saved an estimated $214 billion with a B dollars. That's not nothing. That is significant, and I salute that. But we also should point out that when Trump was doing his Madison Square Garden rally, and towards the end of the campaign last year, they said to Musk, they talked about the creation of the idea of this Department of Government Efficiency, and they said to Musk, "How much do you think you'd be able to save?" And he said, $2 trillion, which is like a huge chunk of the annual budget, and was and then wow, and then almost immediately afterwards, really $2 trillion, and Musk said, "Oh, I meant to say $1 trillion." Missed it by that much. So right off the bat, the estimated savings are being cut by 50%, but that's fine. All right. So Musk goes into it, and I think Musk was very much a double-edged sword. Super celebrity, brings attention to the issue, brings his dedication, his team, there are certain real assets that he brings to this. On the other hand, Elon Musk clearly is used to running things his way, whether it's Tesla or whether it's Twitter or any of his investments and companies that he heads, and he butted heads with Trump cabinet officials who, unsurprisingly, either A, don't necessarily want to give up that many employees and that many offices and this much of the budget, or at minimum want to be part of the process. And it really seemed like that, Elon Musk had sharp elbows. Reportedly, at some cabinet administration, he said to Marco Rubio, "You haven't cut a single thing from the State Department." And Rubio was able to point to all the people in the State Department who had taken early retirement. And it just, you look at that and you're like, there didn't need to be these fights. This is, maybe this is just part of Musk's brash, I'm the one who can do it personality. But he really made enemies he didn't necessarily need to. But nonetheless, again, it's a serious effort. As of this recording, they calculate they've saved each taxpayer $1,329.19. By the way, it took a while to get that website up and running, which I feel is one of the first things you should have doing. But again, because also it's Elon Musk. Do you think he'd know how to build a website? That seems like it's really in his wheelhouse. But nonetheless, as serious, a effort at controlling government spending that did not work quite as well as we hoped is still an effort to control government spending. That's more than we get most years.
Yeah. I should point out that I had a backup choice for Boldest Tactic, and I feel like I should mention it given that we're on this podcast. My backup was that Jim Garrity, after 2 weeks in Ukraine, decided that, you know what, we should go to the Mad Max land of Syria and check out what's happening there, and then slip out of the country a couple of days before major ethnic cleansing takes place. So, Jim, I'm glad you're still breathing.
Thank you. Okay, when you say Boldest Tactic, also maybe Dumbest Tactic, but... my buddies, one of my buddies had worked in Iraq during the bad old days and came away with a strong opposition to Assad. And when it was at my Christmas party 2024, the Assad regime collapsed. He fled Syria. And he just, we got to go there. We got to check this out. And my attitude had been, sure, yeah, we're doing that. If you guys can get visas, I'm going there. Lo and behold, for our listeners, it's very easy to get into Syria. There are flights from Istanbul to Damascus. All you need is like $200 and a U.S. passport. If you're going to be at Latakia, be careful, because I got out of there right before, like 3 or 4 days before things went really bad over there with massacres and stuff. So, well, thank you. I don't often get called bold, Greg. So thank you. Boldest tactic is, maybe the coaching decisions of the Chicago Bears, who are looking pretty good right now.
We'll see. We'll see if they can finish the job. Anyway, Jim, have a great Monday. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the Three Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Columbus. And then follow Three Martini Lunch, the number 3 Martini Lunch, at both Facebook and Instagram. Have a great day. Join us again Tuesday for the next special edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Tomorrow, the media.